There we go.
There it is.
I don't know if Dan can hear us, but Dan, is there something you need to do to make sure it's working? Do you have to turn it off and verify it, or if so, just go ahead and do it?
Oh, it's on now. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. I'm sorry, I was muted. I came out of the meeting, came back in the meeting. Everything was turned off. Got back on again.
So we think it's good?
Yeah, it's recording now. I can see the little earth up there, the red earth.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Live stream is working. I think last time what happened was I didn't end the stream properly, and it just deleted it. So I got to make sure I don't do that this time.
All right. Well, I guess no time like the present. Welcome everybody to the October Asheville Linux Users Group meeting. Western North Carolina, whatever we're calling ourselves, Western North Carolina Linux Users Group Asheville, according to the Jitsi meeting. So we'll go with that. Hope everyone's had a good summer and enjoying the cooler weather. So I do not think we had anything planned for today specifically. Again, I would ask, perhaps even implore people to think about what they would like to do or what they would like other people to do, because I know we have some smart people in this group that know things, and it'd be nice to hear from them. So let's go around the room as always. Let's talk to Pete.
Okay. I have been doing absolutely nothing with computers. I've been trying to get ready for the cold weather coming. I spent yesterday draining hoses and, making a list of things that I need to accomplish before we get any frost. I'm still on my computer list of things to do is to come up with a version of Linux that will run on my old X32 desktops and laptops. And I know I've gotten some recommendations in the past, and I have them on my list, which I have to dig out. But if there's any current thoughts, because I know they keep on changing these things, I would be interested. That's it.
Oh, what happened to him? Oh, there he is. You popped down to the bottom of the screen, Pete.
I did.
I
have
a question for you. You said 32-bit?
Yeah.
64? Oh,
yeah, my stuff is so old, they didn't have 30 or 64-bit.
Yeah, that's going to be a little difficult.
I know.
Modern distros are 64 only.
Right.
I think even Debian 12, I believe, is 64 only. It might have 32, but
all the current releases, I believe, are 64. So I think you can still download some of the older versions, although that may be ending soon also. I know all the current efforts are just supporting 64-bit.
Right.
So
it's going to be hard to give you a recommendation.
Yeah, I hear you.
What I would do is go up to DistroWatch, just start going down through the list and looking.
Oh, okay.
DistroWatch.com and look and see what
runs on what.
Is 32-bit supported.
Yeah.
Download that and give it a try.
Good idea. Got that on my list.
I searched it up on the internet, and I did come up with a.
Okay.
Puppy Linux.
Really?
There is a Puppy Linux, yeah.
Mm.
What was it, Brent? You're muted, by the way.
Nope. You're still muted. There you go.
There you go.
That button's being tricky today. All
right.
yeah, I threw something in the chat. It's a site that's pretty good for open source stuff. So it might be useful. I don't know. I've had good luck with articles in that site before.
Yeah, I noticed we get occasional lockups, freezes of the screens too. Anybody else noticing that?
I am noticing that. I was hoping it was just me.
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Yes, they've made some changes to the Jitsi, I guess.
Yeah.
I noticed Antix is on that list, and MX Linux. So if that is the case for each of those,
On the 32-bit list.
yeah, if
Okay.
that is indeed the case, you wouldn't be lonely as far as other users in the group.
Right.
No. MX Linux is a great one, by the way. It's got a ton of tools.
What was the first part? Index?
MX, Mike
MX.
X-ray.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I should have known that. Yeah.
I use AVL, AV Linux MX edition, so I have all the MX tools and tweak and all of that, and it's a ton of stuff. It's even got MX snapshot. That's the best feature I think of MX Linux.
Uh-huh.
You can run a snapshot of your system by just a few clicks of the button.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, restore works well. I've had to restore before, so it works well.
All right. Check them out.
All right. Anything else, Pete?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Thanks so much, Pete. Arnold, as always, says nothing new and is in quiet mode. So let's talk to Larry.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. It's pretty noisy here. The only Linux I've been working on is a Linux furnace. So, and it's like 50 years old. So, but it's kind of interesting because I took a motor out of it, and it actually is large enough so you can still work on it. I mean, you could still repair stuff. So that's kind of interesting. There's some switches in it. The other thing that I was sort of on my mind was GPS. I think everybody seems to be using phones now for navigating with GPS. And when I went to see my niece in Hickory, it was about a year ago, somebody was using GPS in their neighborhood where there's a sign that said road closed ahead when you go into the neighborhood, which is kind of bizarre because it's been that way before they moved in something like 9 years. And somebody went out, followed GPS evidently. It was a Friday evening when one of those hurricanes came through last year. I think it was Hurricane Ian on September the 30th. And went off this bridge that was been washed out, and the barricade was down in the creek, and the man died. Now, after a year, his widow is suing Google because they didn't keep their maps updated, and this barricade was down in the creek. It's a fairly large metal barricade, and it was sometime before last fall, like in the summer or the spring. I got pushed down in the creek. When I mentioned it to my cousins or my niece's husband and one of the neighbors, they say teenagers. And when I've gone back by there, like about once a month this year, there was various other things like somebody put up a concrete barricade there and some plastic orange barricades, and also there were plastic wreaths and some memorial to this guy who died, a bunch of pictures and things, which were all smashed up. And then the orange barricades got pushed in the creek, and the wreaths got thrown in the creek. and everybody keeps saying teenagers. But so seems like to me the teenagers have some responsibility, and this lady wants to sue Google and also two companies that built the bridge or built the houses or the neighborhood because they say this is a private road and the state's not responsible and the county's not responsible. Nobody's responsible. But if you blindly follow GPS, which seems to be common these days, especially at night, I mean, my relatives do that too. I don't drive like I used to, but it seems like to me that everybody now tends to use GPS. And if you follow it in the dark at night on a stormy night, and the bridge is out in an unfamiliar place, then you go off a bridge and you die. What are you going to do? Sue Google? Anyway, that's something that's been on my mind for a while about how wonderful tech is, I guess. I don't. So that's it for me for right now. I might chime in a little bit later.
Well, Google has deep pockets, so that's why they're suing Google. Also, Google is far more likely to just settle out to avoid negative publicity because to them it's just not a whole lot of money to throw, say, $100,000 their way to make them quiet. So that's why they're suing Google. And lawyers. Yeah, that's why they're suing Google.
Yeah, it seems like a strange situation. It seems to me that the teenagers have some responsibility, or the people in the neighborhood who can obviously see a hazard, a road hazard, and there's a sign going into the neighborhood. But when you're coming out of the neighborhood, if you're not familiar with the place, like evidently this man was not familiar with his place, and he was just lucky that his two daughters were not riding with him, because they probably would have been hurt or killed too.
My question, Larry, is why isn't there a big sign at the entrance saying "bridge out" and then a
Because
barricade at the
it
bridge
just seems like
preventing you from
somebody, it
going
seems
across?
like somebody needs to have some responsibility. I mean, it's
Yep.
just bizarre. There are like two signs that says you turn into the neighborhood, but there's a couple of roads that go in that vicinity too. A couple of other turns, and if you're not familiar with the place, and you're coming out of there, like at night, and it's in the rain and the storm or whatever, it'd be easy to get confused, or especially if you're following Google. I mean, it's really a bizarre situation, but I don't know how common this is, but it seems to be common for everybody to use GPS these days, and they're navigating around in unfamiliar places. So I guess driving on roads is dangerous. I mean, period. Anyway, I mean things like I saw something else about a car tire coming off a vehicle and smashing the windshield of another vehicle, and somebody gets killed that way too. What can you do? You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's your time, I guess. You're unlucky.
Well, Larry, along with GPS, it's a great device and everything, modern technology. There's something called common sense. I mean, I know on stormy nights, it's a different situation, but I read recently about a case where a guy in Japan was using a GPS and the GPS told him to turn right. He turned right and went off a bridge. So you got to have common sense too.
Yeah, I know. It seems like to me that the world is different now. I mean, children grow up like my niece and nephew. They're like 30 years old, and they're so dependent on their phones and GPS. What difference? You don't know anything else. That's all you. Every time you don't know something, you ask your phone. You use GPS. You're just so dependent on the internet and believing everything on the internet. That's that's what life is now for young people. We want to call it common sense or whatever. And when we were in school, we actually had to learn things, not just look it up on Google or online, which seems to be the standard these days.
Yep.
Maybe Ludd wasn't wrong after all, huh?
So
I I was on a ride on my bike in Canton last weekend, and the a lot of folks who ride bikes have GPS bike computers, and they're not quite as full-fledged GPSs. They don't always do like rerouting. So um, this woman didn't really know the route very well, and who was being our ride leader. So they ended up going like the wrong way, and their computers told them they were going the right way because they had basically looped around. They'd basically started going back the way we had already been, um, which was, as if they were going to do the loop again. So the bike computer just like, oh, you're on the right route, because yeah, they were, but they'd already been there like, an hour before. Um, so yeah, I fortunately, some of us were basically routing based upon, just common sense and memory, because like I said, it was kind of a there and back again route. Uh, and like, yeah, I may not have the best sense of directions, but I know when I'm going in a circle. So, but yeah, they're very much reliant on the GPS. Like I really try not to be. In fact, that was like that ride. I kind of slacked off, and I said, okay, I'm not going to look at the route. There's enough people here. I'm just going to follow them, which was kind of a mistake, I guess. Um, so it doesn't stink in Canton anymore. It's shut down. Sorry, responding to the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the paper mill shut down, so this Canton ain't going to be stinky no more. I think that means it's going to get gentrified now, because there's no reason for it to not to. Um, yeah, so I usually just I internalize, like I know where all the turns are, and especially if I'm riding up here, I just know the roads. I can just look at the cue sheet and be like, yep, okay, I know where I'm going. But down there, at least I didn't know any of the roads. I hadn't been on any of them before, so I'm like, I'll just follow them. But never again, because clearly people don't know where they're going. They're just relying on their devices.
Yeah, with my nephew is 29 years old, and I've gone on a couple trips with him. One of them to like DuPont Falls, and one to Linville Gorge. He has his phone on his dash, and he's just looking at that to try to figure out where to go, even though I'm sitting there and I know the roads myself, you know. And it seems, I mean, I'm looking at the terrain, looking outside at everything, and my niece, who's like 31 or 32 years old now, she uses her phone too, but she'll sit in there, and her husband is driving, so at least she is the one looking at the device and giving him directions, you know. And so he's looking at the road and paying attention to the driving. But if you're by yourself, like my nephew, you know, driving around where he doesn't know where he's going, and you just say, "Oh, I'm supposed to turn here," you know, he's not even looking at where he's going or whatever, you know. So, and you know, and I don't use GPS myself. I mostly go on roads I'm familiar with now. But if I don't, I try to look at the map in advance and write down the directions and sort of memorize what I'm doing and look outside at everything as I'm going. To me, that's just me. But maybe it's because I'm old and they're young.
Pete, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
You're muted, Pete.
Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, my comment was, were you looking at the map on the GPS or do you have a paper map?
Oh, I have a paper map.
You can still get paper maps?
Yeah, well, I've got some old ones, so maybe they're not up to date.
There's the fellow Jitser, Steve.
Can you, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I'm using my iPad temporarily before my computer goes on. It's a little slow. Let me mute myself so people can talk.
All right. I think we were just finishing up with Larry, so I think we're going to ask Santiago what he's got going around.
All right, there we go. I think it should be working. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I'm using a different microphone. Well, yeah, I'm glad to be back here. I've been on here for a while, but I'm glad to be back. But yeah, what I've been doing, I guess, with computers and Linux was, well, first of all, one thing that I was working on was I had a problem with my computer where it kept going to blue screen or it kept freezing up on Linux. So I had to, so at first I thought it was a hard drive problem. Turned out it wasn't. In the end, it was a RAM problem because I messaged somebody about that, and they replied back saying you should test out your RAM because blue screens could be or crashes could be related to defective RAM. So I ran some tests on there, test 86, and it turned out it was a RAM problem because I kept getting errors and stuff like that. Especially when I ran it several times on other applications to test it out. So in the end, I upgraded my RAM. I upgraded to 32 gigabytes of RAM on my system, and in the end, it started working again. And I haven't had any blue screens since, so I'm happy about that. And I've also been trying to get back into Linux and stuff like that because I had to wipe my hard drive for several times for reasons because at first I thought it was a hard drive problem, but I then upgraded to a SSD to an M.2, NVMe M.2, and now I'm in 1 terabyte, and
Wow.
I just recently installed Linux onto it, so now I've got AV LMXE running on that system, and it's running pretty smoothly. It doesn't take too long to boot up after I log in. It only takes like a second. So I'm pretty happy that I got Linux back up. I'm also gonna start learning more about it because I've been off recently, like sleeping a lot. So I haven't had much to do with Linux and technology in the last several months, actually, if anything. But I'm starting to get back into the rhythm of things, and yeah, I mean. And I guess it's really the only two real things I've been working on with technology. I did install something that I did learn from Dan called Mesh Central. So I've been working. So I worked on that for a little. Worked on that recently, and connected my computer so I can use that application. And I'm thinking about starting to work back on LFS, Linux from scratch, and finding a host distro to build it off of, so I can work on that. But yeah, I mean that's basically, I think, mostly what I've been doing because I can't think of anything else I've been doing the last 2 to 3 months since I've been gone. But yeah, that's I guess really what I've been up to.
Question for you, Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
Do you look it up on the internet or do you search it up on the internet?
Search what up?
Anything. Search
Yeah,
it on the internet.
Yeah, I search things up on the internet.
Okay. You're just curious. We had a discussion about that earlier.
Yeah, how did that come up?
What?
How did that come up?
What?
It was a show on NPR just before the.
Oh yeah, I heard that. I didn't know any of you guys listened to Away with Words.
Oh yeah, that's really a good show.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyway, somebody called in and said they were 16 and said they searched it up on the internet and their mother.
Ooh.
Who is it? Me.
Someone's microphone off.
Must be Steve-O because
Steve,
he's got
he's
2 images.
chuckling away like he's.
Oh yeah. All right.
Sometimes,
We've got stereo Steves.
like if it was something, you would always.
I don't know if I can take it.
Nobody's going to tell him he's muted.
Yeah, sorry, my
You're
dog.
muted, Steve.
Oh God, there it is. Luckily, I don't have headphones on.
Steve, turn that off.
There we go. I think it should work now.
Who was the culprit there? Oh my God.
Noises are just going off there.
Can you hear me without screaming and crackling?
Your audio is
Audio
overdriven.
is
It's terrible.
distorted.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness.
No, it's like distorted.
Should have left it alone, Steve. It was working well when you came up.
Steve, I think you're muted. Someone probably muted you. With
Could be. How's that? Is
much
this
Oh,
better.
that
Oh,
sounds
that is
better.
much better. Yeah, you're good
Oh,
okay?
now.
Are
much
we
better.
having any overtones now?
No, that's fine.
No, you're good.
No. I am getting funny things with green screens. I don't know if anybody's reported that in the past. I have not had that before. I'm going to have to install the Jitsi app on this. This is a different version of. It doesn't have the Jitsi app, which works better than Jitsi. I'm
You
only
are
getting it with Brent Knotts, I think, or Dan Calloway. I'm getting green. So
you
we'll
are
see.
you're clipping a little bit with your audio. It's like it's not like terrible, but it is definitely distorted.
Okay,
Yeah, it
I'm
sounds
going to
like
try to
going up and
install the
down
other
the
thing
phone.
and boot and launch from there.
It's kind of like Apollo 11.
All right. Well, let me mute
Follow too.
for the moment. Just consider me muted.
Okay, you're muted.
All right. Sorry about that, Santiago. Did you have anything else?
No, that was basically all I had to say.
All right, that's good. Thank you, Dan.
Well, I don't have anything Linux wise this month, and I'll tell you why. I guess I've mentioned in the past, my wife had two back surgeries in 2 years, and forearm surgeries and a thumb surgery, and she's been through a lot of surgeries and a lot of pain, and still in a lot of pain. So I've been a one-word guy this month, which is called caregiver, and been doing a lot of that. And in the interim, she fell and broke her ankle and her leg, and so that's put her in pretty much isolated in a bed without being able to get up and down a lot. So I've been doing a lot of that, and on top of that, about a week and a half ago, she came down with COVID, and I guess she got that from her office visits, and gave it to me. So I've had COVID, and even though I've had two vaccinations and two boosters, I've still got COVID. But and it's, you can tell in my voice I'm coming out of it, I guess. But a little bit of fever, a little bit of a lot of congestion, and very achy body. Every muscle was pretty much aching, but wasn't hospitalized. So I could only imagine if I hadn't had my vaccinations and boosters, what might have happened. So I haven't done anything there, although I've joined another group in the interim, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, so I've been taking care of my wife, and the other thing I did want to mention, I got a couple of concerns about this group, and I wanted to mention in our meeting. One of them is that we need to get somebody to do a presentation. We haven't had a presentation in a while, and I know there's a lot of talent in the group, and it's just a matter of somebody volunteering. And it seems like we have the same people volunteering all the time. I don't see Leander. Leander usually volunteers, and I do it. And I know Brett's volunteered, and probably a couple of other people I haven't mentioned. But we need to get people to volunteer here so we can. We haven't had a presentation in probably going on 4 months, and that's kind of unusual. So if we can't do it in house, maybe somebody could get somebody from outside to come in and do a presentation. We just need a presentation so we can keep the group going as far as trying to grow it. Because that we do have people visiting through YouTube channel and the website. I know because I get constant emails for joining, that kind of thing. So if they don't see presentations or something that's going to draw their attention, that's educational, they're not going to stay around. So that's one concern I have. And the second one is related to it in some way, but we've got this Google group, and it's got a couple of missions, purposes. the primary purpose of it, of course, is that it's our mail platform and it's how we communicate with one another. But there is a secondary purpose to it, and I think everybody would agree with that, and that is that if somebody needs help, they can come up and post a help request, if you will, kind of like you do in a forum where you ask for help on a particular issue. Now, we've had 3 or 4 people in the last month. Steve is one of them. Post with a problem. Arnold, I believe, posted. Jim is another one, or Joe rather, is another person. I think Bill even posted requests for help. And I wait a day or so to see if somebody else is going to come up and respond. Steve is good to respond. Thank you, Steve, for what you do there. But if I don't see somebody come up, I'll come up and respond. But I've been pretty much the only person that's been responding, and I shouldn't be the only person. I mean, I know I own the group and I moderate the group, and I stay in it more than most folks do. Plus, I'm retired, so I'm not working a full-time job. So it's easier for me to do it. But, if we see somebody with a problem, not all of these problems, by the way, guys, can wait, until the meeting, because it could be something that somebody's working with and they're frustrated over and they need immediate help. So they come up and ask for help and they don't get it. And that's not good. So just would ask that, you pay closer attention to it. Everybody should be getting an email, either an individual email or a digest of the requests that come through there. And so if you would just, lend a hand. If nothing else, point them in the right direction. And because it is listed at the top of the screen, if you go on our forum email listserv, it's posted up there that it's a place for people to post their problems and get help. And so we've got to follow through with that. So other than that, that's pretty much all I got, Brent.
One thing, and I don't know if anyone else has had this issue, but I did try to follow a thread this month about someone's problem. I forget what problem it was. But I had trouble digging down to the original problem because there were so many different. Well, part of it is the way Google was displaying email to me, because I may have deleted certain components of the thread and left other components of the thread, and then that was part of the problem. And then just with all the re-quoting of the email within the thread, it was just really hard to follow the original problem. And I don't know if that's something we can change in the way the group is displaying it. Obviously, if I go to the Google Groups itself, I could probably find it much more easily. But I did encounter that to the point where I think I may have just at that point run out of time and something else got my attention and I gave up. But yeah, or maybe I did get to the bottom of it and it was something I couldn't respond to. But either way, I know I didn't respond.
So let me ask you, Brent, are you following that through your email or are you following it on the platform itself?
I'm following it on email on my phone.
Yeah.
And that's generally how I encounter.
So it's going to override the Google functionality. The other thing, too, I would mention is there is a search functionality there on the platform. So if you could search for the topic, it will bring you to the thread.
Yeah, I agree with both of the things you're saying. One thing I do disagree with what you said is you do have a full-time job, sir. I know my wife is a caregiver to her elderly parents, and that is absolutely a full-time job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I've been going up and down the stairs a lot. That's all I got.
All right, Gene.
Okay. I've, for some reason, had a lot of crashes on one computer, so I finally just threw the towel in and went to another computer, and it seems to be, knock on wood, working now. But if it suddenly quits, it's just how things have been going for my computing here lately. I haven't really gotten into anything. I've just been using, every day Linux. I'm kind of waiting on the next long-term uh, uh, version of Xubuntu, which is what I've been using. Seem to be pretty happy with. I have noticed a lot more lockups maybe than I've had in the past, and I don't know what that is. I kind of suspect that I've got a lot that I'm working my either my memory or my processor pretty hard, and with a lot of tabs open or something like that. And I don't know how intensive they are for sucking off your processor or your memory or whatever, but I suspect that might be part of the problem. So my hardware is getting some age on it. I'm thinking about possibly upgrading and getting a little newer setup for the for what I use every day. I'm not particularly going to get rid of anything, but maybe just add one that's got all some bells and whistles that I don't have now. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
with this, I'm back on the iPad. I'll have to futz with it later on the computer. Usually, when people say it's the hardware, the first question, I believe, as an amateur, is, well, do you know how much stress and strain the computer is showing using a tool that monitors this? And I have a couple. I'm sure people have also used this. And it says how much is free memory, how much is free, how much percent CPU. HTOP does some of this. There's a collection of tools which include one which monitors that, and I'm forgetting the name right now. And then the other thing is, okay, you're right. It looks like it's not the processor, but it may be the memory, the storage. And then you rush and you say, well, maybe you need a newer SSD, and instead of a rotating drive. I mean, those are the basic things that immediately come to mind before replacing a treasured piece of hardware like a laptop or a desktop. So I don't know what your situation is. What have you looked at? Because you're obviously an experienced person.
Oh no, not nearly. But it hasn't happened enough that it's become. I'm not in crisis mode or anything like that. So I haven't really tried to dig into it. I'm just sort of shooting off the top of my head at this point. But if it does keep happening, I might have to use some of those tools that you're talking about. So I'm not familiar. I do know that that there's some of the things that you can look at in settings that that'll show you the memory usage and all that. And I haven't really looked at that much, so I guess I should start there. But there again, it hasn't happened often enough to get me really worried about it. I'm just saying, I'm blaming this, that, and the other, and not really without any real evidence of what's going on. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, Gene, does Xubuntu have a system performance feature menu?
I feel sure it does. I don't know if I can pull it up on my computer. Under.
Yeah, just I didn't know. I don't use Xubuntu, so.
Well, it's got all the things that Ubuntu has, so I would say it probably does. And I have looked at something that gives you some of those stats before.
You can put it in monitor mode and let it monitor the system over time too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll look into it further at some point. But like I said, I haven't really had enough of them. But there have been some. And I'm wondering too if it's if it's not that we're coming near the end of the cycle for the distro that I'm using. Uh, I'm up to I mean it's close to 4 years old, I guess, and or 2 years old at least. So when I do the updates, and maybe the updates are um, more sophisticated than what I've been. Anyway, I don't know. I don't understand it that well.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is HTOP's got that load average feature.
Yeah.
You can take a look at that for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That helps.
I'll take a look at that. So other than that, I mean, everything's been performing pretty well. I was going to say, talking about cars and further to Larry's topic, my sister just got a new SUV, and the screen, I don't know if you can see both my hands or not, the screen on that thing is larger than probably the first TV I ever bought. And I say, does that not distract you? And she said, oh, no, you get used to it. But then the usage on the screen it's not full screen usage, in other words. So I don't know if they've just widened it out previous to utilizing the full screen, or whether it's just all for show. In other words, we've put in a bigger screen, but we don't have the capability to make all that screen live. I don't know enough about it for that either. But I do know this thing is huge. And she said, oh, no, you get used to it. You don't even notice it, after a while. You're not, I said, if that were in my car, I think I'd be trying to watch a movie on the damn thing, So anyway, that's about it for me, I guess.
Well, thanks, Gene. Steve, what you got going on?
Okay, I'm unmuted now, and everybody can hear me? Good. Mainly, I posted, there were two things. One is Pipewire, which is becoming standardized in many major distributions as an add-on to ALSA, is being tested out in the newest version of Antix 23, which corresponds to Debian 12. And recently there were a number of issues in terms of it working reliably, and they seem to be resolved by some adjustments in the settings. So that's something I had been kind of involved with simply because ALSA is obviously the primary tool in the kernel, but I find it, as a permanent newbie, I find it difficult to make it work in some ways. I found it not always reliable. Sometimes ALSA Mixer wouldn't start. Sometimes, but mainly that I couldn't easily change connections to a headset from the built-in speakers on the computer that I use, and with Pipewire, with using Pavu Control, which is a carryover from Pulse Audio, it's duck soup easy. And recently, it seems to be even automatic. You plug in the headset, and the sound changes over. You pull the headset cable out, and it switches back to the built-in. So all of that, which was occupying some time recently because an update made it not work, now is resolved. And so what I've only gotten, they only got as an issue in my head, is actually an extension of an old, huge question, and that is understanding networking. So that's a huge question. I remember the days when you used to do ifconfig before IP replaced ifconfig. And then it seemed like there were no secondary fancy connection managers. It seemed to me that you would routinely set it up. It wouldn't it would always be after you booted that you would then secondarily connect to the network, and that it did not automatically connect. So that was one question I had: is once you set up using the basic configuration commands or set up a network interface, how to be sure or how to make sure that you can have the computer look at that setup and during boot start in an efficient fashion. Then the other was, is it worthwhile really to move to any of these new connection managers? And I know we have available what's called Conman, DH Client. We don't have Network Manager. We no longer have WICD, which I have on an older version of Antix, which is working fine. And I thought that would be a reasonable thing that other people might or might not be interested in. And it may be that most people are running full featured distributions, which it's so automatic that once you install it and you put your configuration in, you never have to think about it again. And so it's not worthwhile to talk about for anybody but me. But my particular issue that drives my interest in this is that sometimes I want to take this laptop out of the house and wirelessly run it on either somebody else's network. So when we visit relatives, I like to use their network, and mostly they're okay with that, and they'll tell me the password, and all I have to do is if I configure it in Conman once, then it'll remember it on a reboot. But I had a particular problem with the Antix 23 install where there's a delay for over a minute during boot while it continued to try to connect to Ethernet. And I don't have this laptop connected by Ethernet. And so I started down the rabbit hole, thank you. Look, trying to remember things that I haven't used in probably maybe a decade and understand networking again. And so that's when I suggested in one of my posts to this a few weeks ago that some kind of presentation on how to do networking, either using one of the tools, one of the connection managers, or doing it the old-fashioned way directly with the commands that the connection managers basically automate for you, would be really, I thought, maybe of general interest. Now, instead of saying we should get somebody in who knows how to do that, I think that's a little unfair, but I would be happy in, say, 3 or 4 months working with someone to try to just have someone as a backup who I might chat with and say, look, here's what I'm planning to present. Here's what I think would be a simple way of connecting to the network using the old-fashioned the IP commands, which is the replacement for ifconfig, and the network interface, and setting them up, and then understanding that you can also set it up to automatically boot, whether you're at your own home network or whether you're at another network where you know the password. So when I go to the senior college, they have a sign and it says what the network name is, so you can select it, and what the password is. So there's and when I'm at one of my kids' house, I ask them, but I can't build that in as at this point in time, I don't know that I can build that in as an alternative, that I can set up 3 different networks that I commonly use so that it would work automatically with no great time delay during boot. So that's my challenge. And I figure if that might be a worthwhile thing. So I would be happy if people would provide feedback on whether they think they'd be interested in hearing about it. They don't have to do any work, but if they'd be interested in hearing such a presentation in 3 to 4 months. And that would also fit in with Dan's comment that to make this a more lively, active forum, we should have presentations that are of interest to people. And that's it. So I'm reviewing things like DHCP. Is that the problem? Is it I have to look at Conman's main.conf. I have to go to etc. network interfaces, or do I need to get involved with resolve.conf or what is it, resolve.conf? Or do I just have to give up and try to accept that I'm going to have a minute and a half delay at boot? Anyway, that's it for me.
Yeah, Steve, I answered, tried to point you in the right direction, and I guess I misunderstood you when you said you took your laptop outside your home and went somewhere else. But I looked at that, and I know you're not an advocate of System D, but if you were, you'd have an easy you'd have an easy fix, because you can use System D, the system control. You can go in and you can actually eliminate some things that you don't need on boot up, which will vastly increase the speed at which it boots up. I did that in my own laptop, by the way, and reduced the boot up time from about 45 seconds down to about 20 seconds or less. So you can do that
I
by.
think, Dan, I think you make an important point that I live in a world where I'm avoiding System D, and System D changes a lot of stuff and may be
Yeah.
a boon, may be very valuable. And if you think it's worthwhile at such a presentation to have a specific presentation on how System D makes it all easy, that would be wonderful to include.
Okay. Well, and the other thing
Again,
too
if
is,
people are interested in general on
yeah,
this
the
topic.
other thing too is the DHCP aspect with a file called dhcp.d/dhcp.conf. There's a lot of configuration in there you might take advantage of. But one of the things you mentioned is the difference between IF config and IP config. And I kept hearing you say IF config replaced IP config. That's two different worlds. IP config is with the Windows world. IF config's always been with the Linux world.
No, this is just IP, not IP config.
Yeah, IP is the new command in newer Debian, and it's
IPA.
IF config is going away, which is
Yeah.
very, very, very disconcerting when you're so used to using it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Me. Tell me about it. But yeah. Okay.
So thanks, Steve. Actually, I have a conman story. I think the last time I talked to y'all, I suggested I might consider rebuilding my laptop with Debian 12, and I did twice, because first time I'm like, what Windows manager do I want to use? So I'm like, I haven't gone with a really lightweight Windows manager in a long time, so I decided, let's try LXD. I haven't used LXD in ages, so let's try that. I spun it up, looked fine. Everything seemed to work fine, but I installed QEMU and the VM stuff,
Mhm.
because the one thing more than anything else I use my laptop for is I install Kali Linux on a VM, and I use that to test security things against work. And so I did that, and I had nothing but trouble. But basically, every time I brought up my VM, my network would disappear. And long story short, Conman was screwing me over. Every time the networks would appear for the VM, it would bring those up. It would try to use them as like the default. I'm like, you're so dumb, Conman. And I could have fixed it, but I'm like, I don't have to fix it. So I just went with XFCE, which uses Network Manager, and the problem went away. So my very brief experience with Conman is that Conman can be stupid sometimes. That
Don't call it
that being said,
Conman.
say again.
They don't call it Conman for nothing. I was going to say we all have our Conman.
Yeah.
So I mean that is kind of the problem, is like, if you're having trouble with Conman, I other than spinning up a machine with Conman to see what the ins and outs are, I'm not going to be able to help you, because every machine I have has Network Manager. So that, I mean, that is one thing that is restricting things. but to sort of go along with my Debian story, I am rather happy with Debian 12 now running XFCE on this machine. It's leaner than what it had been with Mint, and I like that on especially on a laptop because you know your limited screen resolution is just nice and clean. And it's Debian 12, which I use at work extensively. So it's a consistency there. I do have to get used to some of the newer things, but and I am very happy with because I had been using VirtualBox and I still use VirtualBox on my main Linux Mint box, which I may update. I may bring that to 12 as well, Debian 12. But I'm very pleased with how easily I was able to spin it up in QEMU. That seems to be a nice platform as well. But my VirtualBox story is I have been using VirtualBox on the machine I'm using right in front of me here for a very long time to run testing VMs for work. And we have this issue at work now where there's something that's breaking on remote machines, like a VPN functionality, and I have not been able to replicate it on my current VMs. So I'm like, well, my current VMs are just things I built directly at home, and they're not at all. They don't resemble like our images at all. So my coworker said, well, we can build an image. We have a place where we can build VMs and image them as if they were desktops or laptops, and they'll basically get built exactly like our images. I'm like, well, that sounds great. So it took a little bit of figuring out, but now I can just go to that VMware workstation. I can build this VM, which uses SCCM to deploy all these packages. So it takes a few hours to get all baked in and have everything it needs. But then once it's stable, I shut it down, and I FTP it back home, which is, we're talking about like 40 gigs or so, but it takes a little bit of time, but it's doable. And then I can uh, import it directly into VirtualBox. One thing I found I cannot do is resize the VMware uh, VMs with the VirtualBox tools. So I have to make sure that they're plenty big to start with. Um, but I ship them home, bring them up, and so now I have really accurate testing things instead of just sort of half-assed testing things that I spun up. So they're very much like standard, Northern Arizona healthcare workstations. And now I have a Windows 10 version, I have a Windows 11 version to simulate what I have. And in fact, they're still running right now on this computer I'm using here. So that's and again, I may bring those to QEMU if I decide to move to Debian 12 on this guy, since it seems to be working so well on the laptop. But for now, it's VirtualBox. So what was the other thing I wanted to mention?
I got a question for Steve though before I move
absolutely.
on.
Sure
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you say that your laptop, one of the issues it has is that you go out and when you try to connect to a Wi-Fi connection, it keeps searching for a wired connection.
Right.
For the
That's-
longest time.
And I think theoretically in the intensive conman at least, which is I think what's driving that the main.conf apparently has a way of disabling. There's a section for disabling technologies, and I might try. My last resort would be trying disabling it. They had a section for preferring technologies, and I wrote in Wi-Fi over Ethernet. Wi-Fi hyphen Ethernet rather than Ethernet, but that didn't work. So it's part of the challenge is to understand the whole mess of network things, because I understand from a bit of looking that sometimes you try to make a change in one conf file and you find that it's being ignored because another conf file somehow takes precedence and is driving it. So because it's all a big gamish of different files that coexist, it gets confusing. And as far as Conman is concerned, there's a number of different alternatives offered. And Network Manager, though, is apparently not one. And I suspect it may be that Network Manager is, if it's offered on currently on Debian and Anthix is a derivative, is that because Network Manager may be system dependent.
Well,
So,
the other thing too, Steve, you have to
yeah.
remember is when you're working with a comp file, you'll have to restart the service for it to take effect.
Oh, well,
You
this
have-
is when I reboot.
Yeah,
So,
okay. Then
you know,
that'll
I'm
restart.
assuming
That'll
that it has to,
reread.
yeah, that
Okay.
everything stops and then restarts is my assumption.
Right. You
Now,
don't have to do that, but that's one way of ensuring
Yeah.
that is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a boot issue because I'm seeing it at boot, sit there, sit there, sit there. Seems like forever, but it's probably a minute and a half, which
That's
is,
unusual. I've never heard of that before. I've
yeah,
never
I
heard
have
of it.
now. I have an older laptop which has an Ethernet because the Wi-Fi is not working well, and that one it has one line for seeking connection, and then it connects. So I'm saying, well, that's slower and older, so that's not terribly upsetting to me that it will take that time. But this thing goes 6 times, and I'm assuming that it's like a minute and a half. When I've tried to time it, at least it's over a minute. And that's ridiculous. When I run the earlier version on the same machine, on the same network, which uses WICD, which is now deprecated, that one just, I don't even see any notation of connecting to the network.
Yeah, and Steve, that's the other reason I mentioned you might be able to take advantage of either setting up a DHCP reservation or a static IP on that laptop. That way, when you take it outside, it's not going to go looking for DHCP server to connect to get a license or a lease.
My concern with that is if I go to somebody's network where what I've selected, let me see. If I'm using DHCP, I'm thinking of two different things that I have to do to connect to another network. One is I seeking an IP address. So I need to know the network and if there's a password, the password. And then I need to receive an address for my machine. Setting up a DNS server is a secondary thing, and I don't know that I care. I'm happy to use the default that's in the network router wherever I am for my purposes. So I'm not sure what I should set up that would make life easier using DHCP on the laptop, the DHCP client. But hey, I'm open. Enlighten me, O guru, please.
I really kind of wonder like why nothing I've ever encountered would try to do anything with a connection that's not connected, that has no physical link. So I just have to wonder like, is it actually doing what you think it's doing? Which is it actually trying to configure the wired link?
Let me tell you. Oh, let me tell you what it does. It has DHCP Discover.
Yes.
It runs a bunch of DHCP Discover, interval 7, interval 14, interval 10, about 7 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it seems to give up the least time, I guess, quote unquote, the least time has been reached. And so while, you say, okay, we'll make the least time 5 seconds, and that way it'll automatically give up, and you'll only have 5 seconds and then it'll give up and go to Wi-Fi. And I might do that out of desperation if I can find where I set the least time.
Well, the least time is a server configuration regarding how long an address is good for.
Correct.
I assume this is I'm not super familiar with the configuration of the DHCP client.
Yeah.
But there's probably some ways to tell it to give up sooner. But why is it if there's no physical connection? Why would it try?
Right.
Like that's not normal behavior.
I know that, and I've seen that. So somewhere the configuration. See, that's the mystery.
Abby normal.
You're right on there, and I bow to your superior knowledge as a network specialist. You tell me where I screwed up, and I'll fix it.
We need Leander to come in and talk
to you.
To you.
My will.
The thing is, I haven't had I'm not super familiar with that tool, but if it's just using behind the scenes, just DHCP, it's probably all the same thing. but like I said, if I try to run DHPC against um, something without a physical link, I think it's just going to fail. I think it's just going to tell me no link, and it's going to immediately go,
Should.
we're
That's
done.
desirable. That's
That's
desirable.
what it should
Yes,
do.
exactly. Yes,
Um,
we're agreed.
I don't have a unconfigured link on this box to test that. Although I could, you know what? I have a USB adapter I could plug into this guy and try to do that. If I did that on this machine, I'll go bye-bye very quickly. But yeah, that's an idea. I can do that and see. But again, my notion is if I try, because generally like on a command line to run that, you can just run DHCP-C like ETH0 or whatever you're naming
That's
your
right.
adapter.
ETH,
And
ETH
I
zero tools.
think
Yeah.
if it's
Yeah.
down, it'll just immediately go boom. It's down.
Well,
So I'm not
I
going
can
to bother
try that.
trying.
I can try that if I stop the connection once I'm booted, and then launch it and see, without a connection and see what it says. It may just go right to the Wi-Fi, because when I run Conman, I'm running it automatically via Wi-Fi. I mean, I select Wi-Fi to run it, so it's not like I'll have to figure out if there's a command line command that I can say, okay, do your thing, Conman. And I'm not going to tell you which one to use. But if I tell it to try to use Ethernet, then it may run once and say, nah, can't do it. I don't know. But it's presumably doing something similar at boot, or the settings are telling the machine somehow to do it. But it's going through the DHCP discover. That's what's running repeatedly, which is not something that's internal to Conman. I mean, that's part of the DHCPC daemon, I think, or daemon.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the challenge. Then you fix it, and I will give you a Hershey bar or whatever floats your boat. You enlighten me, and and maybe in 3 or 4 months we can have a glorious discussion.
Maybe I'll reinstall LXDE on this thing and force myself to make it work with the Conman so I can have I pressed the easy button because I'm like, I don't like this. I'm going to go back to something that I like.
I don't think I've ever used Conman, actually.
Oh, it is a challenge.
Network
Everybody
manager.
should use Conman once.
And I stopped using VirtualBox too, by the way. I use VirtMan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I that was one thing I wanted to try by moving to this Debian 12 box is install QEMU Vertman instead of VirtualBox, and it's working fine. It's I can't say it's any better or any worse. It's a little bit. I mean, it's not as featureful as VirtualBox, but I don't really use those features anyway. So
no. The other thing too is if you use something that Red Hat is trying to replace, well, they're replacing it with this. I think I mentioned it to Steve, and that's Cockpit. That's how Red Hat uses. That's how they bring up their virtual machines is Cockpit. That is a wonderful tool. I mean, for virtual machines, you can bring up a virtual machine in 3 seconds with Cockpit.
We're a VMware shop at work, and I'm pretty adept at that. So maybe I'm I'm not on that team, so I probably shouldn't be as willing to do this. But I'll spin up a half a dozen virtual machines and have them do my bidding. But yeah, it's so easy, especially there where we have sort of all the resources at hand. We basically decide where I want to make it and how much space it needs, and I can give it as many processors as I want, and
more than 16 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, I can give it plenty of RAM. But that being said, like one of our virtual environments is really jammed up now, and so we need more resources.
It's all the data mining.
So I was thinking about what Dan had said, and I do wonder. some problems are hard to fix online because, if it's a problem that you see at boot, unless you do something with like an iPad or, a phone or something where you can have a camera pointed at the screen, that's hard. But there's a lot of problems that can be fixed online. And I'm just wondering, would it be worthwhile to have like a troubleshooting focused session where we dismiss with the going around the room and we have, say, 3 or 4 people with specific problems that have been determined ahead of time, and we give them the appropriate time slice to address the problems. Not to say that we'll fix it, but we'll look at it and we'll give our 2 cents and maybe get people headed in the right direction, if not actually fix it.
Yeah,
Does
that's a good
that sound,
idea.
for one, like, do we have enough? I mean, obviously, we don't have everyone here, and that might bring people that might not otherwise come here. Um, but does that sound like something that is worth at least investigating?
Yep, absolutely. Another thing
Yes.
too, Brent, I noticed is this is a trend that I've noticed in our forum is if I go to try to troubleshoot somebody's problem, oftentimes in the troubleshooting process, I have questions. And so I ask them to post, like, what's your operating system? What were you doing when this problem occurred? Can you give me a screenshot of when it occurs? That kind of, I never get that. I never get them to come back and answer my questions. And that you can't help somebody that doesn't answer your questions because that's what you do in troubleshooting. You have to
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
narrow the scope of the problem down. Um, so that's one of the things we can talk about too when we set this up. But I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I should say that on the Antics forum, this is very common. And somebody comes in as a new person and asks a question, and the first thing they usually get back is, okay, first you have to post this with INSI, INXI, and either you post using this combination of options or that combination, and then you have to tell us a little more in detail about this if you expect help. So it's interesting. Some of the people then respond very promptly, and some people you never hear from again.
So it turns them off.
Well, they had an interest, but it was a limited interest, and oh, okay, it seems more complicated than I guess I thought.
Yeah, put this up on patch bin, I guess it's called, or
Yes,
is it
yeah.
patch bin? I
Sometimes
can't
if you
remember.
can't do a direct attachment
Yeah.
or do a screenshot, sometimes you'd see a screenshot. I haven't seen patch.
Oh, paste
Not
bin.
patch
Paste. I
bin,
haven't
paste
seen
bin.
paste
Yeah,
bin
paste bin.
in
Thank
a
you.
long while,
Yeah,
actually. Yeah.
yeah. I have a paste bin account actually. I should have remembered the name.
Oh.
But I mean, if you start coming across in that kind of manner to people, you're going to turn them off. They're going to say, "I'll go somewhere else."
Sometimes, but you get people then who are very appreciative too.
Yeah.
It's amazing the range on the forum. We've had a couple of people show up at least for a year or two, and they're tremendous gurus. And they start fixing things, writing scripts, writing wonderful explanations. I mean, it's amazing. I think this is one thing people may have experienced, and we can get answers from other people because I think we're having a three-way conversation. But who here has been appreciative? What are the best sites for explaining things? My own experience as Arch Linux is generally quoted as having the best explanations, even for people who are not using Arch Linux. But I imagine other people have different experiences, and I'd like to know because that's valuable to just go there.
Yeah.
As of late, when I'm looking for technical resolutions to technical questions, for whatever reason, Reddit is a good place to start. Just because the commenting pushes up the most useful content to the top, that is usually a rather efficient way to get at least if it's a simple question or a relatively straightforward issue, that's a good way to get good answers quick. That's not a Linux specific thing. Half the time I'm not looking for a Linux thing anyway, because I work in a Windows world. But yeah, I'll often see when I'm asking questions, like it'll be the question and then someone will append Reddit to the end. So Google will auto suggest Reddit at the end because so many people specifically want to search Reddit for for answers like that, just for the very same reason, is that the moderated content does help get to an answer quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I know also I think they're the exchange, Unix something, I may be using the wrong word, but that has a lot of questions. That's all question and answers. And then Linux questions was a, kind of an oldie, but it's still good.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's getting a similar distribution. So sometimes if it's an antics question that I don't see anything on antics, I'll look on one of the Debian sites or one of their little wiki type things for how to use it. But
Well, typically the best choice that you can use is the forum that's specific to your distro. Don't try to go to Ubuntu to get an answer for an Arch Linux question, kind of thing, which makes sense. That's what I do, most of the times. But most of those forums are going to ask you to post, specific about your system, specific about the distro. What were you doing when the problem occurred? Can you replicate it? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously,
what
it's
have you
good
tried
if you just,
already? Yep.
Yeah, it's good to just supply all the information like that at the get-go. So it's the back and forth is unnecessary.
Exactly.
Arnold asked in the chat if anyone knows the difference between Debian 12 Cinnamon and Linux Mint LMDE Cinnamon. So Linux Mint Debian Edition Cinnamon and Debian 12 Cinnamon. I've not used either directly. I use Debian 12 and I also use Linux Mint Cinnamon, but I have never used Linux Mint Debian Edition. I would assume they got to be very similar, since they're both Debian and they're both Cinnamon.
Right.
I would assume the difference would be anything that's specific to Linux Mint, which is not a whole lot. But I don't know. Does anyone else have specific answers there?
It's kind of like with my situation with the AV Linux MX edition and then MX Linux. There's a lot of similarity between the two. Very little difference.
Yeah.
The only difference is that AV Linux gives you more access to hardware than MX does.
If I had to say, if I were to decide between the two, all things being equal, I'd ask who's using. I'd try to figure out which one's being used more, and go with that, because having other users out there to provide more answers is always a good thing.
Yeah, Arnold just posted something about the difference in time for installation of the two.
The Debian installer is great.
The Debinst is great.
Yeah, I just ran it twice because, like I said, I reinstalled it after having installed LXDE, and it's
unique.
Yeah, it's not any harder than the Linux Mint installation, which is also easy. I mean, I haven't encountered a hard Linux install in a long time.
When you say the Debian installer, are you talking about the NetInst? Do you use the Net installer or do you use the regular installer?
The normal graphical installer from the standard. I went full standard with this install. So yeah.
I use the Net installer graphical mode, and I thought that was super. I mean, for Debian. Yeah.
I use that at work. I use the text installer though, I think.
Yeah, they ask way more questions when installing Debian. You're right.
So Dan, when you do a net install, I know in Antics, the net install that I installed from Antics 17 was designed to be minimalistic to begin with, and you had to have an Ethernet connection because it didn't include Wi-Fi, drivers or software. Right. And then you had to download that. The idea being that you start with a minimal install so that you can add things, and it's easier to add than take away without having problems. So is that what you're doing, starting with a minimal install and then building up to some custom version that you like?
Depends on what question, how you answer the questions that are posed to you during the installation.
Right, but I mean, you can also do kind of, at least in Antics, you can do a full install to begin with, and it just gives you a whole bunch of different packages, and you don't select. So that's
No,
good. That's good for a new person.
Yeah, that's not the way Debian works with the net installer. It gives you the option up front. What do you want to do? You can say you just want to install the core, and that's it. With maybe
Okay,
takes
but
longer, of
you're
course.
doing a net install, and then do you end up with a pretty full but specifically customized to your desires, or do you end up with something that's very, very trim?
No, you end up with what you desire.
No, I meant you in particular. When
Yeah.
you say you usually start with a net install, do you have some that are very trim and aim nothing, no extra fat, but just particular programs?
Yeah, I mean, I've done it both ways.
Okay.
My VM install at work is so lean that, I don't even know how small it is, but its memory utilization is just tiny. Because I just take the net installer and I only specify an SSH server. I
Yeah.
do then install a handful of things after that, according to like my documentation, because I have like a build, like a standard build that I document, but it's only like a handful of management packages. But it is so very. That's one reason I moved to that after the CentOS thing sort of fell apart, is that it's just so very minimalistic. And I don't install a GUI because, again, these are servers, so it's really unnecessary. And it doesn't really install anything it doesn't need. It's really quite, there's no, like Red Hat had a lot of very specific Red Hat stuff that, well, CentOS, that would go in there. That wasn't really important. But yeah, the Debian stuff is just, it's tiny, and you don't really need to have like you don't have to plan ahead when it comes to something like Debian and have like supporting software, because it's going to get installed when you install whatever you ultimately build on the thing anyway. So like if I needed a web server, like I'll spin up the base image and install the web server, and it'll bring up it'll bring in everything it needs to support the web server.
Sure.
Yep.
But if I install something else that doesn't involve all that stuff, it won't have it. So it's just, yeah, it's amazingly lightweight to do it that way. Plus, it's better from a security standpoint, because if something is problematic and you just don't have
Mhm.
it, that's just you're got a leg up.
Well, the
Yeah,
thing
with-
too is Debian by default is stable. That's why it's called Debian
Yes.
stable.
Yeah.
So with Debian 12, what I like about it, I don't know, first of all, why they don't make SSH just a default and don't give you the option of installing it, because you're going to need it. But the thing is what I like about it is you can install Debian 12, and one of the drawbacks to it, and one of the things that people don't like about Debian, is packages are older because they're stable. They've been tested a long time. But you can go in, and there's a process. You can tell it to install Flatpak functionality in your store, the Debian store. And you can actually go in and delete the Debian package and install the Flatpak, and you got the latest and greatest. And so you've got both worlds, best of both worlds with Debian 12 that you didn't have with Debian 11.
You have stock in the company.
No. No. My laptop loves Debian 12, let me tell you.
So anybody using OpenBox for any of their installations as a graphical environment?
I've tried it and I don't like it. I hate it.
That's on my old laptop. That's from the net install, and I added that, and I can just stay in the control line, because I get into X by typing start X, and then I'm in OpenBox, or I can just not bother with that. But yeah,
I used XFCE for years ago, probably 12 plus, somewhere around that, years ago, on an older machine. And since I've been sort of
Ubuntu is XFCE based. So.
yeah, that's one of the ones I used to use back in the day.
yeah.
I mean, you can install KDE Plasma on Debian 12 if you really want to, but why would you want to? You know.
I used to use XFCE on Gentoo back when I wanted to make life difficult on myself.
You actually tried Gentoo?
I ran Gentoo for years and years.
You
So
were.
you're a Gentoo resource?
Yeah.
Not anymore.
He was a masochist.
I mean, Santiago mentioned Linux from scratch. It's definitely a step up from Linux from scratch. It's not
Yeah.
nearly as manual, but I tell you, I have a good friend of mine, Ed. He's in Atlanta. He's at IT, and he did not know much about Linux until he did Linux from scratch, and now he knows quite a bit about Linux. It is the best way to learn the ins and outs of a
Oh
Linux
yeah,
system.
absolutely.
Well, Pat, one of our members who doesn't like to be online, Pat did that. And I remember years ago he was talking about his struggle with it and how I spent a few days. What was it? I mean, from scratch, you're making, doing the make
Mm-hmm.
and from
Mhm.
source and
Make,
building
see,
and
make.
building and building, and it would take a few days for this and a few days for that.
Well, I built my Linux from scratch, from source, following all the directions, and it took about 10 days. But what was really amazing is when I finished, I rebooted, and the damn thing came up and worked. I mean, it almost blew me away. I felt like I gave birth to a Linux kingdom.
Well, that gives you your master's degree in Linux.
Yeah. The next step is to go
Pat,
to that.
Pat was not a noob either. Pat knew his way around the computer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now that is another idea. Is we could theoretically do a screen share and build something like that on a VM. Yeah, that would not be an impossible thing. It's dry, and
Oh
it would,
yeah.
and we wouldn't be sitting there watching it the entire time. Obviously,
There's a guy that does that for 10 straight hours. He's got a video. It's 10 hours long, building a Linux from scratch system.
Oh man, send me the video or
I
send me the
will.
link.
I'll send it to
Send
you.
me the link.
Yeah. 10 hours. It's like, give me a break.
It's a 10-hour video, or
Yes, 10
selected
straight
intervals?
hours. Yeah, 10
Wow.
nonstop hours. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well,
But
this is
there's a
basically
Beyond
counts-
Linux from scratch too.
This basically counts as a presentation.
Yeah. My next step is to go into the Beyond Linux from scratch, which
Yes.
builds on the Linux from scratch system you've already built. And but yeah, I mean, I felt like I gave birth.
so you what do you do in Beyond? Is that where you build like your window manager?
Yep.
And
You build your window manager on top of it and that kind of stuff.
You make Linux Mint.
You make it, yeah. You make it when you end with the Beyond Linux from scratch. It's like you've got an operating system that you downloaded, essentially, but you've done it all from source code.
Have you guys ever used Tiny Core?
Yeah,
that was fun for a while.
Now I built my own vanilla Arch system too.
Oh,
that was about 5 hours, and again, I was sweating. I mean, when I finished.
Well,
but it worked.
You're Navy, right?
Yeah.
So you must have been in Special Forces.
No.
I'm saying if you're doing Linux from scratch.
Yeah. No, I wasn't a SEAL or anything like that.
That's right, SEAL. Sorry.
So, any interest in that? I think that's probably a bit ambitious and a bit dry for these meetings. However, if someone did it and wanted recorded certain segments of it, then that could be a nice presentation. I can't volunteer for that. I just couldn't bring myself to do that these days. Like I said, I spend enough time in Gentoo. Which Gentoo, for those who haven't used it, is kind of like Linux from scratch, but scripted. Like everything is like, you don't have to do it manually but it is built completely from source.
Is that the one that uses the emerge?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
I couldn't actually think of the command, but yeah, that's it.
It uses the emerge system, and that really threw me off. It was hard to get used to.
Which, I mean, it builds completely everything from source, but scripted. With like definition files, everything is is canned in a way, but you're
Right.
still it's all coming from source.
The website, the YouTube channel rather, that I use to build my Linux from scratch is called Gods of Linux. And there's this guy that comes on. This guy is, I think he's so smart that, I don't even know where he began to get all of his information that he got. But this guy does all of this Linux from scratch from memory. He doesn't have anything he's looking at. He just does it from memory, and I don't know how he does it. But he doesn't have a life either.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Well, before I made a comment about Arch and Gentoo, for that matter, as being good sources of documentation, but I think not in reference to building them, but in reference to their presentations of the information on many common commands and processes. On my sense is that when from reading their stuff is the clearest. It doesn't always address my problems, but it's the clearest writing on the subject. And I've seen other people who referred to them. I have less experience with Reddit. I'm not going to talk anymore because I'm going to start repeating myself. And this meeting is getting to the third quarter part, and I'm hopeful that everybody else has spoken. And if anybody else has new interesting things to bring up, even if they've spoken, I'd be happy to hear it. By the way, Larry, I see you're standing by a hotspot. Gene is going to talk.
I just remembered something that I had a problem with. I've got a couple of SD cards, and I have basically two computers that I use. One of them is a Dell, and then the other is a Lenovo. I can plug the SD card into the Lenovo and read and write with it fine. I plug the same card into the Dell, and it won't let me write to it. And I've gone and changed, check mode and changed the ownership and all that. And it doesn't work. It still won't let me write. So I don't know. I don't think I can post you a screenshot or anything.
Is that any card that you put in it, or just one card that you put in it?
No, I haven't put it on multiple cards. No, it obviously must have written to other cards. So could it be the card itself?
Yeah, I was thinking that.
The cards all came out of the same pack. They're little compact SD cards, 128 gigs.
Well, I was first thinking it might have been a hardware issue with the Dell card reader, but it sounds like it might be the card itself. If you try another card, see if it can write to it. If it can, then you eliminate that problem.
Well, obviously it has written to other cards. I mean, I've been using it in my machine. But I guess maybe it's formatted to FAT. But why does it work in the Lenovo and not in the Dell? And these are basically the same vintage laptops. They're not ancient, but they're not anywhere near new either.
Oh, is it the same OS on either?
Same OS, yeah.
Oh, let me ask you this, Gene. What size file are you trying to write to the FAT formatted SD card? There's a size limitation.
Several hundred megs.
Oh, no.
The same operating system.
FAT limitation, right?
Yeah, the FAT limitation is like 2 gigs, I think.
Yeah,
it's not. They're the same operating system on both the Dell and the same version on the Dell and the Lenovo.
Yeah.
And it's not exFAT or it's FAT32.
It's probably FAT32. I don't think it's exFAT.
Okay. I think always what Dan said about checking to see if it's peculiar to one card, making that clear that if the same pattern for all the cards you're using, or it's just with that one SD card. If you have a batch of SD cards and 9 of them will operate the same on both machines, but one of them operates differently, then I'd look for some peculiarity in that SD card.
Well, the card caddies, because they're older computers, the slots are the wide SD. And the card caddies have the on and off switch on them, the right and not right switch. But I checked that.
It's the same card caddy for both machines.
Not exactly the same. I mean, it's a similar one, but not the same.
Okay, I guess that. But anyway, I would.
Wait a minute. Wait. Yeah, the same card caddy that I insert in both machines. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't take it out of the caddy. In other words.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just a question of whether you can separate.
Yeah.
That it's peculiar to one SD card or not.
But
Yeah.
I just wondered if anybody had a flash of this there.
Yeah, FAT32 file size limitation is 4 gigs, so that probably wouldn't be wouldn't be an issue there.
Plus, it's got files on it. Well, here's the other thing: I can go in and sudo and force it to write to that card.
Oh, then it sounds like permissions.
Yeah, it's a permissions issue then. Elevation of permissions. Sudo.
I did the CH mode 777 so that it would have read write permissions. I changed the ownership. It was a root ownership, and I changed that to my ownership. So I don't know. It's a mystery.
But have you tried? You're saying you have other similar SD cards that came from the same package.
Yeah, I haven't tried the same experiment on other cards. From
Yeah, it could be a defective card too.
Yeah. One thing I would try. I would assume you're just trying to do this through the window manager, and it pops up on either, and then you can't write to one. You could
Well, I
look.
don't know if you were here, but I did say that I could force it by going terminal and sudo and force it to write to it.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's permissions issue.
Yeah, so it is. So it's for whatever reason, it's not being mounted as world writable. That's. I'd be surprised if that were to not be happening on other cards then.
Yeah. There's another set. There's another set of permissions that are invisible. Brent probably knows about this. That you can. I read about this, and I've used them once, where you can fix something. Does this make sense to you, Brent? Does this ring a bell? It's almost like access control, but it's not.
Oh, you're talking about ACLs?
But it's in Linux, not Windows. It's an additional level that you can also.
You've got ACLs in
the
Linux.
Command line, but you'd also have to query what its status is differently than just using LSASL.
Well, one of the other things you have to remember is with a FAT formatted disk, it doesn't recognize permissions. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not familiar. That's interesting. I'm not familiar with that.
Straight FAT formatted disk won't recognize permissions that you set up on ext4. If you set those permissions up on an ext4 formatted disk, and then try to copy those same files to a FAT, it's not going to recognize those permissions.
How do you? Does you mean it won't copy to unless you do what? How do you make it copy to a FAT disk if you're saying it automatically refuses to accept files? But we've copied stuff to FAT disks, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I mean, if you've got strict permissions like ACLs and stuff like that set up on a file, it's not going to be recognized by your FAT formatted system. That's what I'm saying.
So I don't know if
I did read something about that. Yeah.
I don't know if this is the case, but obviously, there's no permissions on the drive itself because, like you said, it's FAT.
Yeah.
But it's getting mounted somewhere in your file system, and where it's mounted perhaps you have permissions that are limiting access there.
That's
Yeah.
true too.
And
Yeah.
that's going to perhaps be different between the two computers.
Yeah, that's
I don't know
Yes.
why it would be different, but it could be.
It depends on whether you're, mounting it to a folder or to a location in the system or something like that.
Like Mount Media, blah,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
blah. Okay.
Right. Yeah, that makes all the difference.
How would you go about changing something like that?
I would just do like figure out where that location is and do just a ls, dash al for, the basically the
Hidden,
location
yeah.
above it. You want to see what's assigned directly to that mount directory. And if it's the same, it's the same. But it again, it's obviously a permissions issue. So
Mhm.
it's got to be some configuration that is causing it to. And I mean, I would just, let us know what you're seeing with permissions. Up, above it and up, into it, and see why is it different between the
Yep.
two.
And if you're mounting to a folder, is that folder shared in the system somewhere? And so you have share permissions on top of that. So, you could be overriding that as well.
I don't think so. I don't normally do any kind of shared stuff.
Okay.
So I'll check that out and see what I can come up with and let you guys know.
One thing to ask, the machine that you have the problems with, is that an older machine that you've done more monkeying with? Because that's obviously what gets you into trouble. Is the machine that you've done the most experimentation on has the most variation.
It's actually probably the other way around. But there again, I don't know. I think it's coming somewhere from, like you say, from the mount command.
It's either the mount or the format
Yeah.
or both.
In the old days, you could go into FS tab or mount tab or whatever, and change the config there. I don't know how you do that these days, though.
You're talking about the FS tab file, Etsy FS tab.
Yeah, and there's also a mount tab in there, MNT tab or M tab or something. Anyway,
I haven't heard of that one.
MTab, I think, is your active mounted directory, like the what is currently mounted.
Yeah.
MTab? Never heard of it.
I know what he's talking about, but
I'm not doing a very good job of dredging out.
Well, Gene, you can give us a presentation on it next month.
Yeah, if you want to hear from somebody that doesn't know what he's talking about, that's
Well, that's the case during most things, isn't it?
I can
So-
dabble.
Here's I did a search on MTab in Linux, and it says the Etsy MTab file is a compatibility mechanism. Decades ago, Unix did not have a system call for reading the existing mount information. And it said instead, programs that mounted file systems were expected to cooperatively and voluntarily maintain a table. And that table was called the Etsy MTab. I've never heard of that. That's a Unix thing.
yeah, that's
do you have it on your machine?
Unix.
Yeah.
Dan,
Yes.
do you have it on your machine now? Do you have an Etsy MTab file?
I don't know. I'd have to look.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds familiar from my distant past.
Yeah,
Etsy mount tab is like what is mounted. Etsy FS tab is what you want to be mounted.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I'll do further research and see if I can come up with something. But it's just kind of an annoying thing that you could go from one machine to another, basically the same configuration, but one will and one won't. Well, I spent a few hours farting around with that.
Yeah. Another thing is to try a live USB on that machine to see whether that enables you to recognize that.
I'm sure it would. This has got to be something within his OS.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like.
That's an idea. Maybe I could boot up on a USB drive
Yeah.
and accomplish what I want to accomplish without having to drive myself crazy researching back into all the nuts and bolts and things that I may have, as Brent said, monkeyed with.
Where's the sport in that?
But then we won't get an answer.
I know.
It's better you should drive yourself
Some
crazy.
things you don't need an answer to, Steve. Why is there air?
By the way, guys, I told you, I think I mentioned a while back that I was implementing something called the time machine backup process in Linux.
Yeah.
That's working great. It's backing up my entire home directory every hour. I mean, it's working like a champ. It hasn't failed, and it's been running for, gosh, a month and a half maybe.
What do you back up to?
To a 4 terabyte external hard drive. But it doesn't continually grow, Brent. It grows up to a point, and then it eliminates all those files and copies only one down.
So it's like a ring.
Yeah, exactly.
So you end up with one copy or two copies of most files at the most.
No, it's more than that. It uses the time machine backup methodology, which I don't totally understand. But you have like daily backups, weekly backups, monthly backups, yearly backups, that kind of thing. It's the same way that Mac OS uses its time machine backup process.
So when you're hitting the 4 terabytes, then it just keeps you down within the 4 terabytes. Does it ever have to issue warnings that it's
It will if it
loaded?
runs into a problem, but I've got the 4 terabyte drive, and I probably haven't used more than like 1.5 terabytes ever. It doesn't continually grow, and yet it's updating all the time. What's neat about it is if I'm working on a file and I accidentally delete the file or screw the file up and it's critical, I can go back into the previous folder and pull it out. I don't have to restore the entire system to restore a file, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of Time Machine.
Isn't there a feature of like, what is that? rsync or one of those where you
uses rsync.
Yeah, where you can only backup what's changed since the last backup.
Right. Incremental.
Yeah, incremental, I guess is the word. Yeah. Could you accomplish the same thing with rsync?
You probably could, but the process for Time Machine backup in Linux uses scripts. So it's scripted. It's totally scripted. And it's Lauren 22, I think it is. I'd have to pull it down from GitHub. If you're interested in it, I'll send it to you.
No, I
Okay.
don't back up as often probably as I should. But
Same.
I get a good solid core of what I've used in the past, and then I just sort of let the wheel roll.
Yeah.
Well, the time machine is basically a programmatic add-on to rsync in a sense, where it improves and makes it easy for you to be in control of your files, I assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you have great flexibility, and you can query it and retrieve easily anything that otherwise might be difficult for you to remember exactly or find amongst your folders.
No, not that necessarily. What it does is it prevents you from having to restore your entire backup,
right?
Do a full restoration in order to retrieve a file.
Yeah, so rather than having some kind of gobbledygook, you've got an actual readable file there that
You got an actual readable folder. You can go in and pull the file out. Yeah, exactly.
So that's all backup. That means everything there is also on one of your machine's hard drives.
Yeah, and it's every hour.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got hourly folders until it reaches the end of the day, and then all of those folders go away except one. And
So
it
if
retains
there's
that
an
one back.
accidental delete on a SSD where for some reason you can't retrieve it, or there's a hardware failure on the machine itself, you know that you've only lost anything within the last 60 minutes.
Correct.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And it works via your network, I assume, so you can build up or retrieve anything you want from there, from any machine.
Yeah, it works through the FSTAB. That's the FSTAB file, and and it touches the network, sure.
It's based on what? Is it like it's like a network storage device? It's on a separate device. A
Yeah,
network storage device.
external 4 terabyte external drive.
Just a USB drive or like a NAS?
It's a USB. It's not a NAS. So, but I could put it to a NAS if I wanted to.
What would be
chose
the
not to.
advantage?
Well, to be able to touch it from any machine if you put it on a NAS.
You can't touch it from any machine on the network because as a USB drive.
No. Well, you
could share it.
You could share it. Yeah, but if you didn't share it, you couldn't.
So how do you? What you're touching it from one machine plugged in, where it's plugged into one machine.
Mm-hmm. It's plugged into the desktop.
Okay, got it.
Because that's what I'm backing up.
Yeah.
So I'm confident, when I'm working at my desktop, that if I screw something up and I remember, oh crap, I got rid of that file and I didn't mean to, and I didn't go through the trash process. I went through the delete process, which you can't retrieve.
Right.
Well, if it got backed up, in the last hour, you're okay.
So wow, that thought just went straight out of my head. I know what I was going to say. The hourly backup thing is maybe overkill for the average person, but I tell you, for a like an enterprise network to have every hour backups or snapshots, specifically. They call our help desk, and the help desk can basically, guide them to the restore previous versions, which is sort of the Windows version of this, and they just pull the file out of there and they're good to go. Yeah, snapshots are a great thing to have.
Is when you say a snapshot as opposed to individual file backups, is that the comment?
Yeah, a snapshot is like a clone.
Yeah, well, I mean, is it different in retrieving it? Can you search through that for an individual file as easily as Dan's approach?
No. See, what I do, and that's what I'm saying, Steve, is when I have the time machine backup process running to back up hourly, when I run my MX snapshot, okay, I can exclude my entire home directory from the snapshot because I don't need it.
And the snapshot excludes applications, I assume.
Yeah, well, the MX snapshot allows you to go in and exclude certain files or in folders. So I exclude the entire home directory and just do a snapshot of the rest of the system, which is programmatic and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that's your snapshot. And then for the file-by-file backup, that's all in your home directory where the data is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so when if I have a file I've destroyed, and inadvertently, I don't have to do a MX snapshot restore in order to grab that file back. I can go around to that and just go into the time machine backup folder of the last hour and pull it out.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I've done it. It's wonderful, to be able to do that.
So with the snapshot approach, Brent, that the support group tells an individual they can make the support group makes the snapshot for the individual, basically.
Well, this is on an enterprise NAS. So the enterprise NAS has a snapshot functionality where it's taking a snapshot like every hour, every 2 hours, I forget what it is. And then there's a way to access it within the Windows Explorer where you say restore previous versions, and then it will give you a list of times that you can click on, and then it'll open that folder as it existed at that time.
Right.
So you can just say, okay, I want to look at this folder 4 hours ago, and you open up that previous version before you deleted or altered the file irrevocably, and you can just copy and paste it from that previous version.
And that's, but you're speaking of a folder rather than a total.
That's a system restore. That's what
Yeah.
he's talking about. Yeah.
Now, this is again, I don't run the storage, so I can't talk about the technologies precisely. I just know the end result, which is they have, like every 2 hours for the past day, and then the past each day for the past week, and then like once a week for the past month, that sort of thing. So you can go back a fair ways and retrieve previous versions of the folder.
That's the way time.
What I'm trying to figure out from what you're saying is this. It sounded like you were saying the task is given by the support staff to the end user to pick out the version they need to restore.
Well, the functionality is always available to the end user. It's just like most things, the end user doesn't necessarily know how to use it.
Right.
So, it's not that they have to. They don't have to. They could do it themselves, but it's very often that they're guided how to do it by the help desk.
But then the help desk is basically saying on your machine do such and such.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. Rather
or
than
they're
the help
remote
desk,
controlling it,
or their remote control into the machine, do it
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, so it's not something where the help desk is tasked with doing it for the end user and saying, okay, I'm going to restore your system back for 3 hours.
Right. We do have more, like more traditional restore stuff for things that aren't covered by that, but that involves like other teams and much more process and sometimes tape and yeah.
Ooh.
And I've
Got
done
it.
that. I've done that, Steve, for help desk. If somebody called me and said I need to grab a file that I lost, can I do it? I know then that I need to do it. Not let them do it. So I just remote into their machine and do what Ben said. Yep. Done it many times.
Teach to fish isn't always worthwhile.
Yeah, that's true too.
Here's your dang file.
Yep. Teach them to fish and save a day.
Well, we've done another 2-hour session.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that ended up to be more technical than we expected, which was great. We did chat about some ideas, but we do need to flesh them out. Like if anyone has any specific troubleshooting thing that they think could be accomplished within a session like this, again, I think we could give, if we had 3 people, obviously we could give them, whatever that comes out to, 40 some minutes. And if we had 4 people, a half an hour, something like that, I think an hour might be a little long to jab away at a problem. Maybe not. I mean, it just depends what it is. But if we can have 3 or 4 people or something like that on a session, I think that would be a good diversion from what we've been doing. And like I said, I know a lot of things in a general fashion, but I do often feel that what I know is a little too dry and not necessarily of great interest to the rest of y'all. I have in the past done like a, intro to networking, with a focus on Linux. I don't know that I would do that again. I don't know if it was well received the last time. It was a long time ago. It was in person, so it was a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, if anything, if there's anything people want from me, let me know. But like I said, it's going to generally be more academic professional realm, less so the hobbyist realm.
Now, one of the things, Brent, I was thinking that might be interesting for folks is like, how do you take a Linux box and connect it to a Windows domain?
I have done that before.
Mhm.
So it's certainly something that could be talked about. Yeah, I won't get into the details of that right now, but yeah, that sort of thing, like interoperability
Yeah,
is certainly a whole world. Samba, and
right.
the other way around. Connecting to Linux specific things using Samba, or maybe not using Samba, NFS. The various things, FTP, the way just getting around in a multicultural environment, so to speak.
Yeah, Active Directory domain services domain.
Yeah, that's actually not a terrible idea. All right, well, it is getting to be that time, so unless someone else has something else, I think we'll go.
Okay,
All
I'm
right,
done.
All right. See you guys.
bye y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.